here this morning. My name is Rachel Van Cleve. I'm very proud to be the Dean of Golden Gate University School of Law and very proud to be hosting the first annual Veterans Law Conference organized by the Law Student Veterans Coalition of Northern California. I'm looking forward to what will surely be a memorable day of presentations. I want to thank our generous sponsors who have made this event possible. A special thank you to our lead sponsor, Thomson Reuters. Just over a year ago, a Hastings first-year student invited me to speak at a vigil that he was organizing for the late Ambassador Chris Stevens, who was a former classmate and friend of mine, and the three Marines, Tyrone Woods, Glenn Doherty, and Sean Smith, who had all been killed in Benghazi. I was impressed by the initiative of this first-year student, and I asked how he managed to organize this vigil so quickly in his third or fourth week of law school. His reply, before coming to law school, I was in the Marines. Another student at Hastings introduced himself to us, also a veteran, and said to the first student, "We need to talk. People here don't get us." At the time, I was in my 6th week as interim dean, and that statement stayed with me. I was very concerned that we might have students here at Golden Gate who felt the same way. And so I asked some of our students who are veterans to come and meet with me. They clearly saw this as an opportunity because I called the meeting, they brought the agenda, with some very constructive and thoughtful ideas about how we could better support them. Also working with our students here and students at other Northern California law schools, we established the Law Student Veterans Coalition. Today, we hope to shine a powerful light on the legal needs of veterans and the current work being done by veterans courts and pro bono lawyers and advocates to address these needs. I want to extend a special welcome to our keynote speakers, Colonel and my new friends, Colonel Maritza Ryan of West Point and Professor Kendra Rotunda of Chapman University. The detailed program, including all of the generous attorneys and veterans advocates who will be speaking today, are listed in your program. In addition, what I learned from the students that I've been working with, they want to assist other veterans, so that's the first part of this conference. And the second thing is that they want mentoring, career mentoring, how to best translate their experience to for civilian employers. And so later this afternoon will be a mentoring session where they can speak with informal roundtable discussions with attorneys, hiring attorneys, about how they can translate their experience on their resumes and their interviews. We will also have JAG attorneys here this afternoon to talk with students about what that is like. In the past, Golden Gate has held events and conferences that serve as catalysts for building advocacy for groups who have experienced justice gaps: women, people of color, the LGBT community. These groups also have ABA committees, they have national, state, and local advocates, and strong public constituencies. Such broad-based, strategically connected coalitions do not yet exist in the legal community for serving our veterans. This does not mean there's a lack of need or a lack of interest. It simply means we have work to do, and today's conference is an important step. Our work, starting today, is to challenge our communities and colleagues, whether courts, law schools, firms, or advocacy organizations, to make veterans a priority. By being here today, you've demonstrated your appreciation for veterans and their legal issues. You are the very best spokespeople for enlisting your colleagues to address the justice gaps veterans face, from receiving benefits they've earned through their service, to providing representation for homeless veterans in need of legal services and support. I ask that you join Golden Gate Law School, Law Student Veterans Coalition, other advocacy organizations, Swords to Plowshares, Equal Justice Works, in serving those who have served our country. If you're a law student, I ask that you engage with your fellow veteran students, other law students as well. Join student organizations that support veterans and get involved in externship courses for veterans benefits. And for the veterans advocates among us, thank you for all that you do on behalf of veterans. Many thanks to each of you for coming here today. Through our newly launched Veterans Legal Advocacy Center, Golden Gate Law School looks forward to continuing to organize the legal community law students, and veterans advocates to build and support the broad-based coalitions needed to address justice gaps veterans face. And now, Golden Gate Law student Sarah Quinto will provide a welcome. Sarah is president of Golden Gate Law's Veterans Law Student Association, our Student Bar Association secretary, and one of the Golden Gate representatives to the Law Student Veterans Coalition. She is also in the Army Reserves. She interned with the Army JAG Corps this past summer and plans to pursue a career as a JAG attorney after graduation.
Thank you, Dean Benji. So, good morning, and thank you all for being here today. The Law School Veterans Coalition of Northern California, or LSVC, is a Bay Area-wide and beyond organization that gives veteran law students a way to expand our community and to use our shared passion and resources to advocate for the veterans community. As of today, we have active members from GGU, UC Hastings, UC Davis, McGeorge, Stanford, and USF. This first annual law conference is our inaugural joint event, and we are so pleased to have your support here today. I would like to thank Dean Van Cleve, who as a co-founder of the LSVC has been our champion and strongest supporter, and who has made our vision of this conference a reality. I would like to also thank Kevin McCarthy from UC Hastings and Michael Vanderwood and J.P. Wallace from UC Davis, who have been instrumental both as members of the LSVC and also in the creation of this event. And finally, I would like to thank our sponsors and community partners without whom we would not be here today. We have an amazing group of speakers and panelists for you today, and I want to thank you all for being a part of our first annual Veterans Law Conference.
Thank you, Sarah. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Colonel Maritza Ryan for this morning's keynote. Colonel Ryan is professor and deputy head of the Department of Law at West Point. She is a West Point graduate and served as a lieutenant in the field artillery and attended Vanderbilt University Law School, earning her J.D. Order of the Coit in 1988. Colonel Ryan's initial tour as a judge advocate was in Oklahoma as senior trial counsel. In 1990, she deployed to Operation Desert Storm as a brigade legal counsel, then returned to Fort Sill as senior defense counsel. Colonel Ryan has spent her career in a variety of legal roles, serving in the military, and has been with West Point as a professor and department head since 2006. She is a member of the New York State Bar and holds a Master of Laws in Military Law from the Army JAG School, and has published and presented in Law and Leadership, the Law of Armed Conflict, and Military Justice. Please give a warm welcome to Colonel Ryan.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. As the Dean mentioned, I do live and work at West Point, New York. And not too far from West Point, in the neighboring town of Highland Falls, one morning a gentleman was out walking his dog, and he happened to encounter, as he was going through the woods, what looked to be a plot. And as he got closer, he saw that it was overgrown, and there was a little bit of a cube of granite that was marked with the letters MC. And the gentleman was a bit of a history buff, and he thought to himself, I wonder if this MC could be Captain Corbin. Margaret Corbin, who was the hero of the Battle of Fort Washington, fought back on November 16, 1776, and who had died an impoverished veteran, having suffered grievous wounds during that battle, in which, this is the bucolic town of Highland Falls, which at the time the gentleman was walking and discovered what he thought might be this grave, was actually known as Buttermilk Falls. And the reputation of Margaret Corbin had persisted amongst the locals. She had drifted sort of into legend, but still, the thought was, could this be her? during the battle, which actually not known to many people, but women did frequently travel with their husbands, go to the battle, and in this case she was actually serving as a laundress and a medic at the time. This was the last battle in which the Americans attempted to keep the British from taking New York, and as you know, they were unsuccessful. But during that battle, Margaret had suffered some severe wounds to her face, to her arm, which was nearly severed by grape shot, and to her chest. And she lived the rest of her life an impoverished veteran. She was the first woman to obtain a veteran's pension from the Congress, half of a soldier's pay, which at that time for a private would have given her about $6.05 a month. And then she became kind of an eccentric in the town. She was known for being very short-tempered. She drank the rum rations that were given to her, since they had no such thing as medication back then. She was a little bit antisocial. And one day, at the ripe old age of 50, she did pass away. The gentleman who discovered her grave and contacted the Daughters of the American Revolution was walking in 1926. So she had laid unknown, unheralded for all that time. Then in a little bit of what you might call West Point CSI, the West Point surgeon had her body disinterred. They did an examination and they were able to identify her by her wounds, that this was the famous heroine of the Battle of Fort Washington, which is also known as the Battle of the Alamo of the American Revolution. I mention her because it brings to mind the idea of how we must never forget our veterans. Today, there is a monument to her at West Point, and she's the only Revolutionary War veteran that is honored in this way. But it makes us think, what if instead of just this one veteran that obviously suffered from severe physical wounds as well as psychological wounds, what if instead of that we had 800,000 to 1 million veterans that suffer such wounds? And what if the time frame were not 1776 or 1926, but 2013? And that is where we find ourselves today. And so what I wanted to talk about today are the challenges that are facing veterans who are coming back from what has been known as the era of persistent conflict. Because if you think about it, we have been at constant war in at least 2 different countries for the past 12 years. So I want to talk about 3 things. First of all, in looking at the veterans of the era of persistent conflict, what is it that makes them different? Because knowing this is the one thing that will help us to both understand them and to draft the solutions and fashion the ways that we can help them. So I wanted to talk about 3 things. 1, how the nature of the American way of war has changed and what that means for today's veterans. 2, the novel, the insidious, often hidden threats that exist to veterans' health. And 3, of course, progress and hope, of which this conference is a very solid manifestation, thanks to the leadership of Rachel Van Cleave. The nature of war, the American way of war. Of course, I mentioned 9/11, the day that changed everything. We have been activated in combat ever since that time. And even today, just a few weeks ago, we had a case involving one of my friends at West Point whose son was horribly injured in Afghanistan. And the message that sends is, we are still, even though we are winding down, it is still dangerous and still have us in harm's way. I have their AVF, all volunteer force, also known as the other 1%. I think we all heard about the recent movement talking about the 1% at the very top and the 99%. Well, this 1% is the 1%, less than 1%, who are serving in the armed forces today. Now, taken as a whole, veterans who have ever served in the military make up 13% of the adult population of the United States. But the ones that are in active duty service right now, less than 1%. And the doctrine has been aimed towards using technology to leverage the numbers, which have been increasingly going down. I have resource constraints there because if you think back, for instance, and really this started happening, veterans saw this coming out of Vietnam as well. But if you think back to World War II, it was a case where the entire American population was activated. Everyone contributed in one way, shape, or form or other, either by physically men and women joining the military, or civilians who actually had to ration and make sacrifices to the taxes that were levied, to those who went to serve in the factories, and on and on. It was a total war effort. Our experience today is, in fact, very different. Although we are actively engaged abroad, and have been for the past decade, in armed conflict, we have instead an isolated group of people who are, for the most part, our Army and our Marines and our other branches who are doing this. And that has certain ramifications, which I'll go into. And the resource constraints, I don't have to tell you, from the news coming out of Washington, D.C., this is a very, very tough time, either to ensure that, really even from the very beginning, you may recall we go to war with the Army that we have and not the one that we would like. You know, we've always had those resource constraints when we are suddenly called upon to fulfill missions across the globe. And now we find that when it comes to veterans, we're going to be fighting that same battle here at home. So, what we have is a force that has been stressed in every possible way over the past decade or 13 years. What does that mean? That means that in the context of how war is playing out in the world, that our militaries facing threats that are in some ways the same. Everyone who's ever served in uniform for the United States has a common bond, and there are many commonalities between the ailments and the problems and the issues and the challenges that they face. That is definitely true. But what is the consequence of having an extremely small force? And actually it's getting smaller. We're about 500,000 in the Army now. We're looking at being 420,000 or so by next year. Well, one of the primary results has been that our veterans are veterans of multiple deployments. The stress, if you've ever seen a listing by psychologists of stressful events in people's lives, things like moving, getting a new job, being fired, divorce, etc. Take that and concentrate it down and throw into it, deploying into harm's way, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but some veterans have gone 7, 8 times. Psychologists tell us that in order to recover from an extremely stressful event in one's life, or in this case, an extended period of stress, it takes someone about 12 to 36 months. But we have soldiers and Marines and other service members who are having 6 months dwell time, as we call it. Very hard to recover. On the battlefield, and of course we know about the amorphous outlines of the battlefield that is evident in this conflict. We've seen it before. It's not, they say there's really nothing new under the sun in war. It has a lot of commonalities over the years. But nevertheless, in this battlefield, what we have seen is the phenomenon, for instance, of IEDs, improvised explosive devices. Things that individuals are able to put together with items as simple, and think about the Boston Marathon bombing, using a pressure cooker. They are way ahead of that with the IEDs that have been produced in Afghanistan and before that Iraq. And these are extremely, extremely lethal, homemade, I will say, devices, which can be triggered by someone stepping on them, near them, or remotely detonated by use of an average cell phone that you and I have in our pockets. They are extremely lethal. They cause the kind of damage that is described by doctors as devastating. I mentioned the dirty battlefield here as well. What do I mean by that? Of course, and we in the Army, we love dirt, but this kind of dirty battlefield is the type that is polluted in ways that we would never think of here at home. Things such as, actually, good old pollution. For instance, in Afghanistan, you might not know that if you deploy there, there's so much E. coli in the air because of the way that they process human waste that you have to take prophylactically antibiotics in order to be there and not become sick. Add to that all the kinds of pollutants that come with war, such as traces of depleted uranium. Think about those veterans of Desert Shield and Desert Storm who had to contend with all these different factors, such as that, such as being given a multitude of shots, being given drugs such as anti-nerve agent that they had to take that are not FDA approved. All of these contribute to this idea of a battlefield that is different than what we as Americans particularly are used to, and that cause additional effects that we are only beginning to know about. You've heard, I'm sure, Gulf War illness, which is a variety of different illnesses that come from multi-factors such as this. MST, I mentioned this. It's been in the news a lot, and I could probably give an entire lecture on that. It's military sexual trauma. But it does occur. Up to 15% of women in the military have experienced that. And it will be a shock, but it's the most, it's not a shock to say that it's the most underreported crime. But it may shock you to know that also male-on-male sexual assault has begun to be reported more. That really is the most underreported crime that there is. And certainly the stress, the dislocation of repeated deployments and a battlefield environment contributes to that. I mentioned the IEDs and how devastating they are. Well, the result is that the signature wounds of veterans who are of the Gulf War era include TBI, traumatic brain injury, amputations, PTSD, severe depression, and those IEDs, that random violence contributes to all of that, and in particular, the fact that, this is a double-edged sword here, but the fact that we have made so many advances in medical technology and our ability to save lives on the battlefield means that we have more veterans who come back and who have had to recover from these devastating mental and physical injuries. In other words, people who were struck by an explosive during Vietnam and lost limbs or suffered brain injury would have perished. But now we have the technology, fortunately, to save so many of these soldiers. But it does mean that they require more support, more care in order to recover and continue. Some sobering statistics. We have about 2.4 million veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. Of those, it has been said 50,000 have suffered devastating injuries such as the amputations that I mentioned earlier. But if you include those who are suffering not only from physical injuries, devastating such as those, but also the psychological injury, the physical injury to the brain that is traumatic brain impairment, if you include the chronic diseases, chronic pain that these soldiers have had to deal with, in addition to depression. And by the way, the number one factor that our psychologists have found that contributes to major depression in veterans is how many times have they been deployed successively. If you count all of those up, that means that 1/3 of those 2 million veterans suffer in some way from an impairment. I put 1,500 there. That is the number of soldiers and Marines since 2008 who have suffered devastating injuries to their torso, to include to their genitalia and their ability to have or beget children. MST, the suicide rate, as we know, we don't know exactly what it is for veterans right now. It's much higher than what it is for the population of the same age group. For those soldiers, sailors, Marines who have suffered military sexual trauma, the suicide rate is 4 times that of the average veteran. 25 to 1. For every soldier that has died on the battlefield, 25 veterans have taken their lives. And the other issues that we deal with that come from all of this, particularly PTSD, depression, and TBI, do lead to much higher rates of unemployment and homelessness for veterans. And in fact, women veterans are 3 to 1 more likely to be homeless than women who are not veterans. But let's talk about progress and hope. I mentioned those medical advances. They are incredible. And it seems that when we apply ourselves to include the resources, the brain power, the will to accomplish something, we are able to do amazing things. And veterans today are coming back. They are getting over their wounds as well as they can, and they are going on and adapting in a way that they have been taught to on the battlefield. In order to survive on the battlefield, you have to be adaptable. You have to be able to recognize what threats are in your environment and overcome them. You have to be able to have that determination to go forward. And veterans have come back with that and taken advantage of the medical advantages that there are available, advances that there are available. I have one there that I'm particularly proud of, although I'm Department of Law, I don't do mechanical engineering. But those are some cadets working on an actual bionic foot that has been used to help veterans who have lost a limb due to IED. And it actually functions and reacts more like an actual foot as opposed to a prosthetic. Medical advances are also allowing for even those who've suffered traumatic injuries to their torso to actually regrow tissue, skin, to help the body recover itself. There's new advances going on all the time. Legal advances, which are kind of more our area. I'll just mention one, and I know that they're going to be discussed during today's conference, but one of them I just mentioned is the Ruth Moore Act of 2013. We've heard and we know all about how long it takes to make it through the red tape of VA applications for disability pay and for recognition as veterans needing assistance. And the Ruth Moore Act of 2013 actually removed one great obstacle for soldiers and Marines, those who had suffered MST and had never reported it, which is a characteristic of that kind of offense, and had no proof of it. They could now, under this act, come forward and provide other evidence that is not subject to a courtroom standard, but be able to explain and get the help that they need, the psychological help that they need. The Dean mentioned, and Sarah was speaking today, this clinic here is one of about 10 across the country right now. The number is growing, where law students and faculty members and attorneys working pro bono are providing representation to veterans. It's shocking to me to think of this, but of those veterans that are eligible for VA assistance, for government benefits that they need and want, only 50% of them ever even attempt to apply. When they have representation, the change is stark. That is so helpful to them, to have someone to help them navigate through this Byzantine system we all admit, we understand, that we've been trying to. And in fact, VA, which is the second largest cabinet department in the United States under the president, has streamlined and has increased its ability to handle what has been an overwhelming number of soldiers and Marines coming back and needing that help. And of course, today you're going to be discussing veterans courts. That's one aspect I really didn't talk too much about, but the result of some of this TBI, some of the PTSD, is that veterans do get in trouble with the law. A lot of them with substance abuse or with other crimes. And veterans courts certainly handle the criminal aspect of it, but most importantly, as I'm sure they'll discuss today, they also help veterans, justice plus a little bit of mercy, helping veterans to get the help that they need to get off whatever substance they might be on. And in some cases, it's very unfortunate. Again, an area that VA has moved forward a lot. You may have heard in the news recently that veterans are much more likely to be overprescribed a variety of different drugs for a combination of different symptoms or syndromes that they suffer from, and those combinations of drugs, if the doctors aren't coordinating with each other, can be deadly for them. And so the VA has now established new guidelines to ensure that that does not happen. There has been a reexamination of the use of military force. I think we've seen that with the fatigue that the public felt and expressed most recently with Syria. But that is something that other individuals have brought forward. I'm not the first to say it or the last, and by the way, I should add a caveat that everything that I say today is all my opinion only, not of the Department of Defense, Department of the Army, West Point, or any other institution but myself. And I will say that, Andrew Basovich, who's a West Point graduate you may have heard of, he's got a book out now called Breach of Trust, which really looks very squarely at that issue of how do veterans get to be, and how is it that we suffer from these various injuries and hardships. And one of them is because we go to war. And so what are the circumstances under which we send our young people to war? And what is the responsibility that we as citizens and as members of government and others have to ensure that we send them when they should? There's also a growing realization from people that very few are paying a very heavy price for very many. And in addition to the appreciation that we all feel for that, there's also a requirement that we do something about it. And then the last bullet I have there, veterans as a resource. We talk about this at West Point all the time. What are we doing? We're producing leaders of character for the Army and the nation. Everyone who deploys, everyone who joins the Army or the military and takes that oath to serve. I am just so amazed by the young people that I see every day, by the soldiers and Marines that I meet in various environments. They're such incredible people. And they are so talented. And they have gone out into absolutely impossible situations where they've had very little information, tremendous stress, and they have done amazing things. The stories of heroism and courage and just everyday determination from these young people is amazing and inspiring to me. And so they, in their own way, they are a tremendous resource for this country. And we have to recognize that and do our best to ensure that our programs, that our processes encourage their reintegration and, in fact, their leadership in our society. Who better would you want to come back and lead and inform the discussion in the United States than someone who has traveled all around the world, seen some of the worst of circumstances, seen how the other half lives, has a true appreciation for what we have in this country. I wanted to end with this story here under that idea of veterans and resources. This is Dave Sharp. He was an Air Force technical sergeant. He was deployed multiple times, and he came back a changed person. His family didn't recognize him. He became very solitary. He would not socialize. One day, for reasons unknown, he went out and got himself a little dog, a puppy at the time. I don't think she weighed 80 pounds as she does there. And that puppy, he says, saved his life. One day, he had his gun in his hand. He had a pistol. He was crying, upset. He was angry. He used to regularly punch walls. And he took that pistol, put it in his mouth, and he was about to pull the trigger. And that's when that little puppy that he got came over and kind of tapped him and said, what are you doing? I need you. Who am I going to sleep with? Who's going to take care of me? And he put that pistol down. And from then on, not only did he go and seek the help that he needed, but he also led and founded his own foundation called Pets to Vets. And they spend time and effort recruiting veterans who need companionship of pets, dogs as well as cats, and they get the dogs and cats out of shelters, dogs and cats that would have been put down. It's a symbiotic relationship where one cares for the other, and there's a bond of gratitude and of appreciation that is very strong. Somewhat the way we should be with our veterans. And I'll tell you one last story. There was this one soldier, came back from Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Lots of close calls here and there, but not the kind of combat, the kind of IEDs threat that our soldiers and Marines face today. And then after about 2-3 years, she started feeling a little different, tired all the time, an avid runner, had trouble running, started meeting people who had suddenly blood cancer or had developed tumors over their bodies. And she thought, well, that's kind of strange to hear that. She was okay though. And after another 4 or 5 years, she really started feeling pain in her leg, unable to run. And it turns out, when she finally went in, after many times trying to get a diagnosis, and got an MRI. And she had a huge tumor, soft tissue sarcoma, in her left leg. You don't meet too many soft tissue sarcoma survivors, but she did. She got the help that she needed, the medical help. There was a team of doctors, of social workers, of commanders, of family members, of friends, of peers, of people she had never even met before, who helped her through 18 months of treatment and something like 35 surgeries. She's lost track. But I tell you what, she got the help that she needed to get. And that's why she's here today, because I'm not a soldier. So it has been an honor to speak to you today. Again, Gulf War veterans are different. The needs that they have are new to us, and at the same time, date all the way back to the beginning of this country. And I thank all of you for being here today and for your obvious commitment to the kind of leadership in the area of veterans issues that we need, and that this conference, which is the brainchild of the Dean, represents so well. Thank you so much.
So we'll take a few minutes to get our panel assembled, and then we will start back up again. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.